dry cleaners, take the children to school, things of that sort. You're losing that. Some other things I can think about, which when I'm thinking about children, a loss was when the pandemic hit, COVID-19. Children lost their sense of routine, their sense of consistency and structure. They were going to school every day. They had teachers. They were getting their lesson. Some of our children, that was the one place where they were guaranteed a nice meal. And now they have lost this meal, right? So we think about that. We think about loss of safety, loss of faith. You talked about religion early on. So those are just a couple of things that kind of come to mind.
Yeah, and I think, you're right in that, a lot of people don't necessarily, look at your being empty nesters, for example, as a form of loss.
Right.
But it's something that's very different than what you're
Hmm.
used to. You're used to having that other person or
Right.
people in your home, and so you're used to bumping up against them every once in a while, and you're
Yeah.
used to seeing them and doing having conversations with them um and so it's
Hmm.
very most people will look at loss as actually is like losing a life, but there's so
Yeah.
much more to loss. And you talked about losses that children faced, particularly during COVID, that they're
Hmm.
used to being having the structure of
Yeah.
going to school, of having the routine of waking up a certain time, getting ready for school, going, getting there, doing their work, coming back home in the evening, doing the homework, and just having that set routine that you don't necessarily get when you're at home literally all day long. It
Right.
feels different, and you're not with your peers, and you don't get
Mhm.
that exchange as much. Um, so, how is the way that an adult might process loss, or let me flip that. How
Mhm.
how how is in what ways how do children process loss? How might that differ than the way that we process loss as adults?
That's a really great question. Very kind of loaded question. So I'm going to kind of break it down because when you think about children and their experience with loss, you have to think about the parents, right? Because children are going to follow what they learn. So we have to take a moment and step back and say, what were some of the things that we learned early on when it came to grief and loss? And I can just kind of self disclose a little bit here. I remember when I was younger, my uncle passing away. I remember being told that we had to go upstairs when the adults would gather downstairs. So that was one thing that I learned early on. Couldn't sit amongst the adults and talk
Mm,
about the death of my uncle at the time. We also were not able to go to the services, which was in another state. And anytime that we had questions, you really just didn't know what to say, how to say it. I watched my mom, who was an avid reader, all of a sudden kind
mm,
of lose her interest in reading books because my uncle used to give her Danielle Steele novels. And then when
mm,
he passed, she stopped reading books. And we just didn't talk
mm,
about it
mm,
anymore. So I think when we're thinking about that, we have to think about what were the things that we learned early on. Sometimes with kids, I'll just share this and kind of get back. Most kids, their first loss is usually from a pet or a grandparent. And sometimes parents, they mean well. So in this conversation, I'm going to say throughout, let's give ourselves some grace because we're kind of in this learning period here. I had to learn it as well. So sometimes when you lose a pet, a parent may say something like, "Oh, don't feel bad. Here, have a cookie." And the child is like, okay, I can't emote, I can't talk about what I'm feeling, I'm just gonna take this cookie. And what they
mhm,
learn is every time there's a loss, I'm replacing it with food. And then we wonder why
mm.
the obesity rates are high when they become adults because they
Wow.
have learned that this is
Wow.
how we process the loss, right?
Mm,
Another thing, early on, you kind of hear people say things like some myths, some misperceptions. They'll say things like, you got to be strong for the kids. You cannot cry in front of the kids. And that's a myth. We
yes.
can emote in front of our kids. We have to remember normal, natural. We have to normalize it and show our kids that it's okay. We lost this pet. We lost granddad. Let's talk about it. Yes, mom is sad. Yes,
Yeah.
dad is sad. We have to be able to learn how to communicate and change some of those myths and misperceptions that we learned early on.
That is so key. This idea of communicating how we feel, because as adults, our children look to us as
Yeah,
models for how to handle grief, how to handle loss,
absolutely.
how to handle anger, how to handle so many different kinds of emotions. And particularly, I'm going to speak from the perspective of in the African American community, because
Yeah,
that's my community. That's the only community I really know. But
right.
there would be a lot of that, as a child, that adults would be like, oh, just get over it, or you'll be all right. Just just in essence, what they're saying is just sweep it under the rug. Just
Right.
just just don't deal with it. And then it manifests in some other kind of
Mhm.
way, and then they wonder why. Then they label the kid as bad, when
Right.
no, the child is not bad. They might be doing a behavior
Mhm.
that is not um looked at in a positive light, but there's a reason behind it. And so rather than just banishing them,
Right.
engage them in conversation. But I think part of the issue with why a lot of times parents may not engage their children in conversation is because they really don't know how to. Like, they really don't have the tools to know how to communicate on their level, or they may think that they may need to communicate in a way that's different than how they communicate with an adult. So what are some tools that you share with parents of children that you maybe counsel as to how they can communicate with their children?
Sure. Just if I could go back for a second, you said something and I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about it. Sometimes you see what you were describing, them acting out in different ways. And those are some of the short-term energy relieving behaviors that kids may act out in. You may see all of a sudden this kid is starting to bully people, or this kid is engaging in substance use or things of that sort, or someone's working out excessively or overeating. And this is just this short term energy that they are doing to kind of relieve the behaviors. And it's not the most effective way for them to do so. So, one of the things we talked about is that I do teach a 4-week course on helping children with loss. And one of the things that we talk about is doing emotional energy checklists. Now,
Hmm.
emotional energy checklists are not, and that's something you will learn in my course, so you can contact me. But you can also, I'll share the book information a little bit later. But with the emotional energy checklist, that tool is for adults. It's for the parents, it's for the school officials, the clinicians that are working with the children. It is a tool that is going to help the adults to kind of think before they speak. When you think about it, you ask the child that just kind of experienced this loss, you say, hey, Jimmy, how are you doing today? I'm fine. Do you want to talk about anything? I'm okay. I'm fine. I don't know. Those are usually some of the responses that you're going to get from a
Mhm.
child when you ask them something. The emotional energy checklist will, let's say we're talking about their first loss, like I said, could be a pet or a grandparent. It was a pet. It will give you some options like, do you recall the first time you and your family thought about getting a pet? That kind of helps
Wow.
you to generate communication or conversation or dialogue.
Okay.
Do you remember who helped to name the pet? How did you all come up with the pet? what were the vet visits like? So you can kind of start to think about some of these things on the emotional energy checklist. And then later in the process, we have something called the recovery components, where we take all of that information and we help the child to write a completion letter, right?
Mm,
So all of that kind of helps with that. And the emotional energy checklist, as I mentioned, it is inside of the book that I'll share before we end this live today. But that's
absolutely.
one way. Another thing that we do is also just having these conversations in the home about your relationship with the loved one. So we're setting aside time, mom, dad, whoever is in the house, caretakers. We sit down and we actually talk about our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions that's associated with the loss. We don't hold back. If a parent is in the process of feeling like, I'm really ticked off about this loss, because sometimes people go through anger, right? And they want to talk about it, but then they say, oh, the kids are here, I can't talk about anger. Yes, you can. This is a safe space to talk about it, because you show the child that I don't have to internalize this. I don't have to keep this in. I can talk about it. That's just
Mhm.
another example. If a parent wants to cry, they can cry. You're showing the child the normal, the natural reaction to that loss. So those are two things that we do within the method.
So it sounds like you within the method you are working with both the parent and the child, to make sure that the parent understands that they can have conversations with their children about what they're going through, about what they're feeling, and that they can be honest, if you
Yes.
will, with their children. And in modeling that, it helps the child to then feel safe, feel like
Hmm.
the parent is a safe space for them to come and share, what they might internalize, what they might be
Right.
going through, and to not just sort of put it off. I can remember, a long time ago when our youngest Kayla was, I don't know, about maybe 4 or 5. She had a pet gecko. That was her first pet, a gecko,
Mm.
and the gecko died. And that was her first experience with death. And she was really, really sad.
Yeah.
And and so what we did, we kind of, took a page out of the Cosby Show.
Hmm.
No matter what you think about him, the
Hmm.
show is still a classic, and it still has great
Yeah.
messages.
Hmm.
But the episode where Rudy's pet died and they gave it a funeral, so we did the same thing, kind of went in the
Ah.
backyard and gave the gecko a funeral. In that, she was able to express how she was feeling, how she felt about her pet,
Hmm.
the relationship she established with her pet and how losing it made her feel. And,
Yeah.
so that helped her to understand growing up that when she is faced with loss or grief, that she
Hmm.
doesn't have to go in a corner somewhere and curl up in a ball and just be alone in it.
Right.
And I think that's just so important, not only for children, but I think that's important for adults as well. That they have
Absolutely.
a safe space to be able to get their emotions out without feeling judged, without feeling like, they're going to be viewed as weak, or any of that kind of thing that we tend to say in our culture.
Yeah.
And especially with that, sort of strong Black woman trope. Um,
Hmm.
a lot of us have been really laden with that. And we saw
Hmm.
our mothers, portray that. I saw my mother cry twice, like I could count it twice in
Hmm.
my life. Now, does that mean that she only cried twice? Of course not.
Hmm.
But that those were the only 2 times that I saw
Right.
her be emotional in that way. And so in some ways it sort of made me feel, because I would cry. I was a
Hmm.
crier. I'm not going to refer to myself as a crybaby, but but I would cry if I
Yeah,
didn't
you were
feel like I
able to
needed to cry.
express.
I
Yeah,
would cry.
yeah.
But in not seeing her cry, it did sort of make me wonder, is something wrong with me? Like,
Mm,
why am I crying? Like, I'm supposed to
right,
be strong. And but the strongest people are the ones that are able to be transparent and who are able to,
hmm,
talk realistically about what they might be going through. And
right,
in that, they're able to then help others.
right.
Um, so
Absolutely.
so what are some other things that you think that we should know? So if we are somebody, if we're parents or if we're
Mhm.
teachers or anybody who works with children, um, what are some other just tools that you think that are important for us to know about?
I think the most important tool is just being able to allow them to have opportunities to talk. I would say definitely being on the lookout to see if there are changes in their quote unquote normal behavior. If you're noticing that a child is no longer interested in activities that they normally would be interested in, that's something that you might want to check in on. If you're noticing that their appetite has changed, their sleep pattern is off, they're a little bit more irritable than usual. Or one of the things that I notice sometimes, especially with our young boys, um, they can sometimes get labeled as having different behavioral disorders when in actuality, if they are becoming aggressive or they are irritable, it may be some underlying depression. So you want to be sure to check in, talk with the kids, use the emotional energy checklist with them. And as I said, it's more so for the adults, not the child. You're not going to hand that over to them. That's just a tool for you to
Mhm.
use to kind of get them to kind of talk a little bit. So just kind of looking to see, are there any changes happening with the child? How, and then checking in that way. And also not being afraid to talk to someone. I know a lot of times we talked about being faith based. I am faith based. A lot of times when things happen, we immediately go to our pastors. I used an example of how I was guided to my pastors. I watched my family go to the pastors whenever, there was any issues that they wanted to talk about. I did a whole dissertation on perceived need for psychological services in the African American church. You can check it out. So that's something that we need to kind of say, okay, yes, I can go to my pastor in addition to actually seeking out the help that I need. So,
Yeah, I think it's so important to understand that most pastors, while there are some certified and some licensed
yes.
mental health practitioners who are also
Mhm.
pastors, most pastors are not. And in fact, can't even use the terminology counseling
Right,
unless they are certified counselors. They can say they're providing spiritual advisement,
right.
um, but that is often different than
Mhm.
what one might need in seeking a therapist, one that they can really sort of sit down and not only just talk through the different challenges that they might have, but a therapist is usually more equipped with tools and resources and um, activities, homework, because you got to put
Right.
in work yourself. But
Yeah.
that work, that inner work that you need to
Mhm.
do to come to grips or get at the core of what is happening with you internally. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's okay to pray. In fact, yes, pray. I'm gonna say it again, pray.
Absolutely. It's
but
it's
but
it's in it's the in addition to,
yes,
and I just want to make
yes.
sure that I'm very clear. When I thought about it, when I got to my dissertation process, I said, wow, pastors are so weighed down with so much. They're so many things that parishioners are going to them for. How
Mhm.
about this one thing we can kind of transition and take away from them because they get so much, right? So
So
that
true.
was one of the reasons why I kind of went and dived into that as well. So just wanted to make
And
sure I share
yes,
that.
if you want to read her dissertation, it was excellent, because I read it.
Thank you.
But really, really, really excellent work. So you talked a little bit earlier about, is it a book or
Yes.
that?
The book is titled When Children Grieve. This book was written by the late Russell Freeman and John James, the late John James. They both passed away. Also with Dr. Landon. Dr. Landon gave really good examples in here in her book. Dr. Landon was the daughter of the father on Little House of the Prairie, and she
Oh yeah.
talked about, yeah, she talked a little bit about how, living in that light of her father being a celebrity, it was like they could not grieve. They had to grieve in the public eye, and how challenging and how difficult that was with her. So when Don and Russell approached her, she was very excited about writing this book. And this is the book that you're going to get some of the different ways on how to do the emotional energy checklist and how to communicate for children. Um, and one of the things that I really like, it's like towards the end of the book, and a lot of people ask me when they come is they'll ask a lot about, will you allow a child to go to a funeral? And there's a lot of debate in some of the classes. Some people are like, absolutely not. They have to be this age, they have to be that age. And I say to them, would you allow a child to go to a wedding? And if most of the answers are pretty much yes, then they say, well, that's different. Is it? Let's talk a little bit about it. When you go to a wedding, you talk about the do's and the don'ts at the wedding, right? Some people, they may not invite kids to their wedding, and that's okay. But if they're invited, you talk about what you're going to see. You're going to see the couple. They're going to be excited. There may be
Mhm.
some tears, right? They're going to be happy tears. That's the same thing we can do when we're talking to kids about the funeral. Now, you don't have to agree with me, but I'm just letting you know when you think about should I take my kid to a funeral, you think about the wedding. And at a funeral, if you know the body is going to be there, you can talk to the kid. You can say, grandpa's going to be laying there. You can talk about the body. You could talk about what it might feel like. You could talk about the fact that some people are going to be crying, some people are going to
Yes.
be sad. And then we're going
Mhm.
to have this awesome moment where we're going to have a celebration. And through our pain and through our hurt, we are going to reflect on fond memories of granddad. How awesome is that going to be? It's a sad occasion, and I get that,
Mhm.
but kids can experience. So just wanted to kind of share that because I think that that's a nice, neat way for them to kind of end the book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, and thank you for that, because I think that we often don't give children enough credit. Like we think that they just can't handle, and usually it's really our own fears that we
Mm-hmm.
won't be able to hold up or to handle whatever
Right,
is occurring, and therefore, we have to appear a certain way in
right,
front of the child, as opposed to just appearing to them as human. I
right.
say all the time how, initially children, they see their parents as kind of like God. But then
Mhm.
at some point, I don't know when that switch hits, but you just realize, you look at your parents and they're like, they're human.
Yeah.
They're human.
Yep.
What before we get off, one of the other things I wanted to ask you about that just came to me. What about children who have some kind of uh mental illness? So like a child maybe that's on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum, or a child with special needs, like are the ways of communicating the same, and or are there differences depending on the specific mental health challenge that they might have?
Sure, yes, definitely. It really will depend on the diagnoses of the child. You can have someone on the spectrum, and it's a spectrum, right? So you have to meet people where they are. So you can do things if you have a child, let's say, for instance, who nonverbal, who may have limited cognitive ability, if they communicate through a PEC system or an iPad where they are doing a software called Proloquo where they can kind of identify things and they have icons that they can use, you can communicate with that child through the use of those devices. You just have to make sure that you're communicating with them on their developmental level. And if parents are feeling like that may be a challenge, this is where you want to make sure that you're seeking out assistance and help through a therapist that can help you deal with that. But that's one of the first things that kind of comes to mind when you talked about children on the spectrum or just children that may have intellectual disabilities. So,
And are there therapists who specialize, um, are there certain specialties for children that might have those kinds of challenges?
yeah, I'm sure there are, and I can provide you with some resources that maybe you can put on your website. But I'm thinking of one therapist off the top of my head, Kia Metley Stevens. She is in Delaware County. She is available virtual or in person. I think she does some things in Newtown Square. So that's one therapist I'm thinking about. Also, Dr. Karen Stalling, she's another therapist that might be able to help. There's a couple of people that I'm thinking about, and like I said, I can provide you with that information. If parents are having some challenges and they want to find a therapist, or they're having some challenges with finding a therapist, excuse me, you can go on to Psychology Today. You can actually even type in exactly what you're looking for,
Mm.
and they will give you a list of trained therapists that can work with your child. Also, if you have insurance, you can go on the back of your insurance card and call the 1-800 number and just kind of talk about it. You can talk about it with your pediatrician. Your pediatrician can kind of lead you in the right direction as well. So there's different things that you can do. And like I said, I will provide you with some resources that maybe later you can post so that people get the help that they need.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing Mind the
Sure.
Mental platform with me today. I think you've just given some really great nuggets, for people who work with children, and and good reminders too that children are to be seen and heard.
Yes, absolutely.
There was an old adage a long time ago that said, children are to be seen and not heard. No, they need to be seen and heard. And
Yes.
they can get the kinds of help that they need, if an adult, will take the time to seek it out. Are there any other closing parting things that you want to communicate? Can you tell people how they can get in touch with you? You know, share any and
Oh,
all of that.
sure. Sure. I just really want to stress that seek out the help that you need. There are so many resources out here that can assist financially if you need assistance. If you want to reach me, you can reach me at Dr. underscore Edna on Instagram. I can help to guide you. I can talk to you a little bit more in detail about what I do with the grief recovery method, which is my 7-week course, and then also helping children with loss, which is a 4-week course. But the most important thing is that you want to realize and recognize that grieving is something that happens. It is okay for you to grieve in
Mhm.
front of your children. Don't think that you cannot cry in front of your children. Grief comes in waves. There's going to be times where you're going to feel okay, and then it's going to go to sadness, or you're going to feel okay, and then you might have another emotion that's coming on. But just know that it is okay to get help. Don't be afraid to get help. So that's what I want to say.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on with me tonight. Be sure to tune in every Monday night, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Rev Benita Weathers on IG, on Facebook Live, and also on IG Live. You can catch the replay on my YouTube channel. Go to Benita Weathers 329 on YouTube and subscribe to the channel so you can check out all the Mind the Mental Mondays. Also, this coming Saturday, I have a free virtual event where I'm reintroducing my book, The Scream Within: Mental Health and Clergy Marriages, Journey of a Pastor's Spouse. Understand that it's not just a book for clergy, but it's just for people who have loved ones who need to manage depression or any other kind of mental health challenge, and how its impact on the family. And so we're going to be talking about making mental health care a family affair. And so please come. It's called The Scream Within. You should go to my IG, any of my social media. You'll be able to see the flyer where you can register. It is from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this Saturday, November 4th. And again, it is a free event. You'll have an opportunity to come alongside me and talk to me if you've already read the book, if you have questions, if you have specific areas that you want me to talk a little more deeply about. But we're also going to have some fun. We're going to have some giveaways. We're going to play some games. So it's going to be a good time as well. So I really hope that you all will come and join us. Go ahead and register now. And I look forward to seeing you there. And I'll be back next. Actually, I won't be back next Monday. I will not be doing Mind the Mental Monday. So next Monday, you can go and catch up on, all the Mind the Mental Mondays you may have missed. But in 2 weeks, I will be back with another Mind the Mental Monday. So God bless everybody. Have a wonderful week. Dr. Edna, thank you again. Make sure you get in contact with Dr. Edna if you need more resources, or if you can use her course or any other resources that she might be able to share. All right.
All right. Thanks,
Take care,
everyone.
everybody. Good night.
Good night.